From secret hand gestures to fake patrol cars, the police are hiding some crazy ways of catching suspects. But luckily, there are also some ingenious legal loopholes that can get you right out of trouble. Let's look at some unbelievable tricks cops don't want you to know about. Getting pulled over by the cops can be a nerve-wracking experience, but here's some handy tips to avoid things going south. First, when they hit you with the classic, "Do you know how fast you were going?" This seemingly harmless question is actually a verbal landmine. If you say you don't know, you're admitting you didn't know the speed limit. It also means you can't contradict whatever speed the officer says you were going. Instead, just calmly say, "I believe I was going the speed limit." It's not a lie, and it gives you a little wiggle room in case you were actually speeding. Pretty clever, right? Next, contrary to popular belief, a request made to you by a police officer is not the same thing as an order. For instance, you don't have to fully roll down your window unless you are specifically ordered to do so. You may also film police officers while they are on duty, which could serve to prevent any sort of legal shenanigans from taking place, since they'll know that you have the evidence right there in your hand. You also do not have to consent to a search unless the officer has a warrant, and that's not all. If you're not under arrest and the officer has no probable cause to believe you've committed a crime, they have no right to search your car or take your keys. So if you think the officer is intentionally holding you up, you're perfectly within your rights to ask, "Am I being detained or am I free to go?" But what if the cop's on a serious ego trip? States like California and New York require officers to provide ID upon request. But if they duck the question, just note the time, date, location, and the patrol car's license plate. That way you can file a complaint later. What happens to those complaints after that? Well, we'll get into that in a bit. Cops can rummage through your garbage looking for evidence without a warrant or your permission. Imagine the next time you hear something rustling outside at night, it might not be raccoons, but uniformed officers fishing through your empty pizza boxes. But before you panic about them kicking in your door to inspect your apple cores, relax. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that trash on or beside your property is still legally yours, meaning trash cans right next to your property are off limits. But the moment you wheel them to the curb, it's considered abandoned and thus open season. Think of it as the thin brown line. But then there's the trickier question of when something's technically abandoned. The Fourth Amendment says cops can only search belongings without a warrant if they've been discarded by their owner. But that definition is more malleable than a fresh tub of Play-Doh. For example, say you leave your suitcase on a train platform while you run to the bathroom. An officer walking by could decide you've abandoned it and start rummaging through your delicates. So if you'd rather keep your heart-patterned underwear private, keep your stuff close. If you thought cops digging through your trash was creepy, wait until you hear about them taking your DNA. In case you failed Biology 101, DNA is the genetic code for a person's entire body. Think of it like your biological autograph, hiding in every cell, including your skin, spit, hair, you name it. And all that sweet, sweet DNA is free for the cops to collect and throw into their database. All it takes is a used coffee cup or a single hair. In fact, cops have just the trick to get it from you. Say you've been arrested and you're taken into an interrogation room for questioning. A cop asks if you want any water or a hot drink. You say yes and take a big sip. Big mistake. You've just got your DNA all over that cup, which can be sent straight off to the boffins at the top to identify you by. Instead, refuse the drink no matter how thirsty you are. Believe it or not, though, you don't even need to be charged with a crime. Right now, more than 3.5 million DNA samples have been collected and cataloged by the FBI, over 500,000 of which are from kids under 16. That might sound wildly invasive, but unless you're ready for a full body wax and a dip in a chemical bath before your next trip down to the station, there's not much you can do. Besides, police might soon have more DNA data than they'll ever need. GED Match is a public DNA comparison and genealogy site that helps people trace their ancestry. But in 2019, police were allowed to sift through millions of profiles hunting for genetic links to a wanted criminal. I can't tell you if that's cool or creepy. While GED Match has been pretty open to working with law enforcement, big names like 23andMe and Ancestry.com have only handed over data when forced to using a warrant. Who knows when they might swing the doors wide open, giving police access to potentially billions of people's genetic makeup. It's a little unsettling to think a criminal could be caught because his sister's nephew wanted to know about his great-grandfather. Handcuffs, the second most iconic ring-shaped item cops have. Number 1 being donuts, of course. But just how easy is it to break out of a pair? Spoiler, it's way easier than you'd think. First, there's trying to pick the lock. To do that, you need to understand the basics. With your average pair of cuffs, the shackle slots into the ratchet bar and it can only be released with a key turned clockwise, then counterclockwise. So what if you don't have the key? Don't worry, a paper clip or bobby pin will do. Most standard cuffs use the same locking mechanism, so if you can break out of one, you can break out of any. Simply bend the pen, slide it under the lip of the keyhole, twist it, and boom, you're out. Another quick decuffing strategy is to insert a thin strip of metal called a shim between the shackle and the ratchet. Tighten the cuff slightly to get the sheet wedged, then just slide the cuff free. Couldn't be any easier, right? Well, what if you could just snap them in two, using only your bare hands? All it takes is a bit of jostling to do it. No superpowers required. Don't believe me?
Push in and out and wind them around each other like this. Eventually you're going to find a spot like that where it seems to bind up on itself. Now, once you find that spot, you're going to want to work it around a little bit to get it really caught. You want to really feel like it's jammed tight. Now, it's all bound up completely, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the leverage of the cuffs against them. I'm going to bow my elbows out, and I'm going to push my wrists in past each other. When I do that, I should be able to actually snap the chain on these handcuffs. Just like that.
Think less Harry Houdini and more Harry Houdini. Nobody likes a speeding ticket, especially when you know you were under the speed limit. But here's the thing, every ticket can be challenged in court, and beating one isn't as impossible as it seems. Your ticket will show your alleged speed and the gadget used to catch you, which is usually a radar gun or a car-mounted unit. These guns fire radio waves that bounce off moving objects to measure their speed. Sounds airtight, right? Not quite. You see, radar works like a flashlight beam. The farther out it goes, the wider it gets. That means if a car is speeding beside you, the radar might get the two mixed up. It can also pick up tiny reflections from random objects, so on a windy day, even something like passing leaves or dust can give off false readings. Then there's plain old human error. Radar guns need to be calibrated with a tuning fork before every use, but poor upkeep can sometimes lead to disastrously bad readings. In 2004, cops driving the popular Ford Crown Vic squad cars were plugging radar guns into the cigarette lighter for a quick charge. This caused electrical interference so bad one officer reported getting a reading of an object speeding at 70 miles per hour. The object? A rock by the side of the road. If you think you've been falsely tagged, you can request the radar's calibration records in court. This applies to speed cameras too, though unlike radar guns, you don't have the nifty human error argument. But that doesn't stop people from trying to find other loopholes. Some drivers try to obscure their plates from being recognized by cameras, either scratching them or removing the plates entirely. But that just risks even bigger fines. Then there's a driver in Surrey, England, who had what they thought was a genius-level idea, gluing a leaf to tactically cover their plate. Eventually, the cops got wise and not only slapped them with a fine, but also shared their scheme on social media. Here's hoping they turned over a new... yeah, you can guess the rest. Ever noticed a cop casually brushing their fingers along your car during a traffic stop? Looks like a weird tick, but did you know it has a secret purpose? According to police lore, it started after a cop pulled someone over during a traffic stop. The interaction got violent and the driver sped off, but was later identified after they pulled the officer's fingerprints from the car's taillight. Since then, it's become sort of law enforcement superstition to leave their prints on every car, just in case things get hairy. The problem is, there's no solid evidence that the story actually happened. It's basically a cop urban legend. Besides, in the age of dash cams and body cams, fingerprints aren't exactly the cutting edge of vehicle identification. So why do they still do it? One theory is they're making sure the trunk is closed, preventing a surprise attack from the rear. Another is that it's to scare the heck out of people. While they're walking to someone potentially up to no good, they can give the car a strong tap. The sudden jolt might also distract the person midway through hiding some illegal substances, helping cops spot them in the act. While both of these kind of make sense, honestly, I don't think even the cops know why they do it anymore. On the topic of fingerprints, though, police have been using fingerprints for over a century. But what if it's not as foolproof as we've been led to believe? A study of FBI fingerprints found false matches in 1 in every 306 cases. Pretty bad, but it gets way worse. One Florida police lab alone found a shocking false positive rate of 1 in 18. That's a stunning number of screw-ups, especially when you consider how many false convictions it could have led to. So what's causing all these false matches? Things like incomplete prints can make it hard to get clear answers. Combine that with potential examiner bias and the difficulties in actually determining two prints are a match, and it quickly becomes clear why so many mistakes could happen. Still, if it were my case, I'd hope they'd get someone who doesn't mess up 1 in 18 times, but that's just me. If movies taught me anything, it's that you're supposed to get one phone call before they drag you to the slammer, right? Well, here's the twist. Outside of calls with your lawyer, prison security can listen to everything you say. So imagine making a sneaky phone call about how guilty you are, only for your own words to be used against you in court. Ouch. And here's the kicker. This happens all the time. I guess none of them ever listened to the handy automated warning that their calls are being recorded. I mean, it only plays every time they use the phone. That's pretty embarrassing. So whether you're planning your next big con or having a personal chat with your partner, maybe keep it off the phone. But just because you're free as a bird doesn't mean there aren't some potentially prying ears. In the last decade, authorities across the world have started using stingrays. And no, I'm not talking about a new freshwater fighting force. Stingrays are a piece of technology that replicates a phone tower, cataloging phone locations plus accessing personal phone calls and texts. And the craziest thing is this device is about the size of a briefcase, meaning it can be deployed anywhere without anyone knowing. In 2018, the American Civil Liberty Union had already identified 73 agencies across the U.S. that use Stingray-type devices. Countries like Canada and Germany also use these devices in locating suspects. To get around any potential text snooping, you can use end-to-end encrypted apps like WhatsApp and Signal. These apps encrypt your messages as they leave your phone and decrypt them only when the other person receives them, meaning any middleman is out of luck. For anything else, though, it's better to turn your phone off or switch to airplane mode. So let's say you've been called into the police station for an interview. If you're innocent, no biggie, right? Wrong. Just because you're innocent doesn't mean you can't accidentally get yourself in a lot of trouble. Here's what to do and what not to do during an interrogation. First off, never speak without a lawyer. This applies even if the interview is voluntary. Cops regularly try to convince suspects to avoid remaining silent, saying that it'll only make them look more suspicious. Ignore them, simply invoke your Fifth Amendment right to remain silent and sit tight until your attorney arrives. Trust me, some awkward silence is worth suffering through rather than blabbing a bunch of stuff you'll regret. It's also good to remember that giving no answer is usually way better than giving a vague one. Cops are trying to find holes in people's stories, so if you say you left home at 7 only to remember you left at 8 to catch 60 minutes, that could be seen as changing your story or worse, lying. So if you don't know the answer to a question, just say you don't remember. The last and maybe most important thing to remember is this: cops can lie to you. Imagine that an officer has told you that they have your fingerprints or your DNA and that it implicates or even proves that you were responsible for the crime in question. You shouldn't necessarily believe them. Legally, cops are allowed to straight up lie to you. Country crime labs are notoriously backlogged, so if you've been arrested for a crime that was committed fairly recently, it's actually unlikely that police have any fingerprints or DNA from the scene at all at the time of your interrogation. The 6th Federal District Court describes the practice of police lying about the possession of DNA evidence in this way: a regrettable but frequent practice of law enforcement that was not unconstitutional. The case People v. Jones in 1998 allowed allows police deception so long as it is not likely to lead to an untruthful confession. This also applies when it comes to cops promising leniency if you confess. Despite what cops might tell you, only a judge can determine a person's sentence. While confessions under these conditions can be challenged, there's no guarantee that they'll do anything. Not only can police legally lie to you, but they can also use fake tests to try to fool you. In the case of People v. Mays in 2009, cops hooked up their suspect to a fake lie detector that they, of course, told them was real. They then asked their questions and afterwards showed the suspect a fake graph from their fake machine that they said proved that the suspect had lied when answering their questions. The suspect then admitted to having been at the scene of the crime, and the court ruled that this was a voluntary and admissible confession. In a similar case, detectives washed a suspect's hand and then applied a field kit used for testing if a substance was illicit or not that changed color. When it changed color, they told the suspect it had done so because they'd recently fired a gun with those hands, a complete lie. Civil forfeiture is a process whereby the police can take money, cars, and even homes that they suspect are involved in criminal activity. Unlike criminal forfeiture, the owner of said property doesn't even have to be convicted of or even charged with a crime in order to permanently lose their property. You then have to get a lawyer and prove that your property wasn't actually involved in criminal activity, or the police can simply keep it as funds for themselves. Obviously, you can see how this system encourages civil forfeiture since everybody likes money. In these sorts of cases, it isn't uncommon for prosecutors to tell you that your case isn't complicated enough to justify you hiring an attorney. Know that it definitely is, and that you need to be on your guard unless you want your property to become part of the police department's budget for next year. This clip contains what is probably the most important and useful trick on this entire list, so make sure you watch closely so you don't miss any details. As you can see, by simply carrying a relatively small piece of ductwork with you at all times, you can use it as a quick disguise should you ever become engaged in a foot chase with the law. As long as you're in some sort of urban or industrial area, once you spring your disguise, you should become virtually invisible to the police. Commentators on the video, presumably professional criminals, describe the unique tactic as impressively stealthy and pure genius. Before you have a go at me for helping criminals, I'd like to remind you that most criminals aren't smart enough to pull this off successfully. So what do you do if you left your ductwork at home? Maybe take a note from this guy who found the perfect hiding spot just chilling on top of a window. This fugitive was wanted for growing some wacky tobacco that a locksmith had noticed while working inside. After tipping off the cops, they raided the place. So with nowhere else to run, he climbed out of the upstairs window and hid above it, like a very red-eyed gargoyle. While he managed to dodge capture for a short time, he was eventually caught and arrested. But let's be real, not all of us are natural-born masters of disguise. Take Matthew McNally and Joey Miller, who tried breaking into an apartment in Iowa. But instead of investing in masks, these two doofuses grabbed a marker and went to town on their faces. They then loaded up the stolen stuff into a white van and made off. Crazily enough, they didn't get away with it. Thanks to a witness, the cops had no trouble tracking them down. I bet that traffic stop was a little awkward. Unfortunately, within the police force, there has developed a culture of protecting your own, even if it potentially conflicts with protecting the public. When hackers gained access to the largest police union website in 2016, they uncovered some fairly disturbing information. In some places, there are guarantees that make sure that complaints made against officers by members of the public are kept secret so that they won't affect the officer's career or reputation. In other cases, the complaints are simply destroyed altogether. When The Guardian did an analysis of Fraternal Order of Police documents, they found that a third of them contained a clause allowing the destruction of records of civilian complaints, departmental investigations, or disciplinary actions after a negotiated period of time. A third of the documents also barred the public from accessing past records of complaints. All of these rules serve to make it as difficult as possible for complaints made against officers to actually have an impact, meaning that officers who frequently receive complaints could very well end up long outstaying their welcome on the force. Neil Franklin, a 33-year law enforcement veteran from the city of Baltimore, wrote an article about his experiences directed at civilians, stating that all citizens should understand how to protect their constitutional rights and make smart decisions when dealing with officers of the law. He said he believes that important information about dealing with police officers has remained largely unavailable to the general public, although due to recent controversies, it's really needed now more than ever. His number one piece of advice for dealing with police in a positive way was simply to remain as calm as possible. Having a bad attitude makes it far more likely that the situation is going to have a bad outcome. Similarly, he stated that it is never a good idea to touch a cop, even if it's in a friendly way or as a joke. But if you are a bit of a nuisance and want to annoy a cop that has just pulled you over for drunk driving when you haven't consumed any alcohol, then why not keep a spare beer in your glove pocket and crack one open with your seatbelt like this? Okay, I wouldn't actually suggest you do that, but it is strange how well that seatbelt resembles a bottle opener. On a somewhat different note, driving in snowy conditions can be really inconvenient. Depending on where you are, getting pulled over for not having the proper tire gear is a very real possibility, and then you can pretty much kiss your skiing trip goodbye. You might even be issued a fine that will help fund the cops. But legality aside, driving in winter conditions can also just be dangerous, and nobody is a fan of getting into car accidents even if you're not concerned with the police. In Truckee, California, cops pulled over a car that they assumed wasn't equipped with proper snow equipment since they hadn't seen any chains on the tires. To their surprise, what the driver did have was zip ties strapped all over his tires. While they of course initially assumed this was simply ridiculous, in reality, they were a legitimate product called the Zip Grip Go. These plastic zip ties are designed to be a replacement for snow chains and are only about 1/10 of the cost. Make sure to check your local laws to see if this drastically cheaper alternative is legal in your area. In 2020, during a protest in New York, a seemingly random number of people were running around wearing white armbands. People quickly realized they were police using the band as a marking to tell each other apart. Subtle. But if you're assuming all undercover cops will be so easy to spot, think again. These were actually plainclothes officers, not undercover agents. What's the difference? Plainclothes officers still wear identifying items along with their armbands. Each also sports their police body cams and badges. Not exactly masters of disguise. So how do you spot a real undercover cop? Let's start with the hair. Short cropped cuts for men and tiny ponytails for women are both common hairdos in law enforcement. They also usually wear loose-fitting clothes designed to hide vests, weapons, or other gear. But the biggest giveaway isn't their outfit, it's their behavior. Undercover cops tend to be overly friendly or ask way too many open-ended questions. Of course, none of this is hard proof. Some people just genuinely love cargo pants and chatting to strangers. That doesn't mean you can just ask them and they'll be forced to tell you, though. That's a myth. Like I mentioned earlier, cops can lie, including about their own identity.
What are you doing?
Nothing. Me? Just hanging around.
So instead of looking at how a person dresses or acts, try looking at what they drive. Unmarked police vehicles come in all shapes and sizes, from hulking Ford Explorers to humble Honda Accords. Try looking for an extra antenna, oddly placed lights in the grille or mirrors, or tinted windows. Any or all of these is a red flag that you're looking at a covert cop car. Then there's the undercover surveillance vehicles made up to look like regular vans. We know at least the NYPD has access to these things, equipped with superpowered X-ray scanning that can detect weapons from up to 1,500 feet away. These unmarked pieces of advanced spyware are indistinguishable from your average van. In fact, your only chance of spotting them is by keeping a radiation detector on you, like, every sane person does. If you notice a sudden spike in radiation, that might be a sign that a van's got more than just packages in there. Otherwise, you're out of luck. Some things are just too good to be true. That's what 100 fugitives should have thought in 1985 when they supposedly won free Super Bowl tickets. Invitations were sent to the last known addresses of over 3,000 criminals, promising free tickets to the big game. All they had to do was pick them up at the DC Convention Center. What they didn't know was that the only thing they were winning was a date with the Metropolitan Police. Over 160 officers, many dressed as ushers, cleaners, and caterers, helped with the operation. Once everyone was inside, the trap was sprung and around 100 people were arrested. This was what's called a sting operation, where cops get creative to catch criminals. While usually not on the same scale, cops run these kinds of operations all the time. Most are officers posing as buyers or sellers of weapons and illegal substances who then lure criminals into committing crimes. But these operations come with strict rules. A sting can't be done through force or by making someone do a crime they wouldn't have done on their own. Instead, they're designed to simply create an opportunity for someone to commit a crime, then slap the cuffs on them the moment they cross the line. So if you ever see a free drugs and illegal weapons sign outside your local police station, maybe give it a miss, especially if you have any outstanding warrants. Facial recognition has come a long way in the last couple decades, with high-level cameras covering every major city. In New York, there's over 3,000 police-owned security cameras littered across Manhattan. Combine that with over 500,000 American faces already sitting in police databases, and you've one scary web of monitoring on your hands. But don't fear, some folks have come up with creative ways of fooling everyday cameras. See, facial recognition technology works by scanning key features like your eyes, nose, and chin, then measuring the distance between them to catalog your mug for the database. But activists in the UK figured out a trick to confuse the cameras, painting weird misaligned patterns across their faces. It's called the CV Dazzle method, and it basically confuses the software by masking the separation between features. On second thought, maybe those two idiots from earlier were onto something. But how can you tell if it actually works? Easy. All you need is your phone. If your camera's facial recognition tech doesn't work, congrats, you're basically a cyber ninja. Of course, face paint only gets you so far. Some people are getting more creative, like making clothes with confusing shapes to trick AI from identifying their faces. And then there's the creepiest hack, using tiny projectors that beam someone else's face onto yours. Is it cool? Yes. Is it also nightmare fuel? Absolutely. But here's the rub. AI just keeps leveling up, meaning pretty soon all these tricks will soon be useless. New systems are even starting to ID people just by how they walk. So unless you've got a brand new strut ready to go, hiding might not be an option for long. Ever been at a traffic stop when the cop suddenly blurts out some random numbers into their radio before speeding off? It turns out police use over 100 different radio codes to keep their chatter quick and discreet, communicating everything from danger ahead to traffic's a nightmare. Often called the 10 codes, they originated back in the 1920s when public safety radio was first being installed in police cars. The problem was that every cop had to share the same frequency, so they were constantly fighting for airtime. That's not an issue anymore, but the codes live on. By far the most well-known one is 10-4, meaning affirmative. Then you've got 1074, meaning negative. Then there's the codes for the real serious stuff like 1010 for fight in progress, 1032 for armed subject, and 1089 for bomb threat. It's an impressive system, if slightly complicated. On top of that, the 10 codes are far from standardized. Many have different meanings depending on the state and country. For instance, the same code used in North Carolina to mean prison break is used in Kansas to signal good audio quality. I'd hate to imagine getting those two mixed up. We get it. You don't need to keep screaming about how good your audio is. Yeesh. Combine these communication mishaps between departments and innovations in radio, and these codes are slowly being phased out. Instead, officers are encouraged to speak plainly. Still, the codes are still hanging on, so knowing them can offer a small peek into the private world of policing. Besides, it might be nice knowing when a cop is trying to give you a hard time that he's just gotten a 1083 to help some first graders cross the street. There's sneaky, and then there's plain illegal. One user on the question and answer website Quora described a conversation he'd had with a Californian cop. They'd been discussing a particular tactic the cop used to catch speeding cars, and spoiler alert, it's both sneaky and illegal. In the alleged conversation, the cop explained that at night he'd get a brown paper towel, wet it, and stick it to one of his headlights. Then he'd cruise around until he noticed somebody speeding and tail them. You see, the paper towel makes it look like the cop's headlight is malfunctioning and people don't expect cops to have faulty cars. So the speeders would usually carry on unaware of the cop directly behind them. Until, of course, he turned his siren on, then they'd know they're toast. And as soon as the copper pulled to a stop, the now dry paper towel would fall off. So if the speeder questioned the faulty light, the cop would simply act like he didn't know what they were talking about. Dang, now that's shady. Driving with just one headlight is illegal across the US and most of the world, but I guess so is speeding. Maybe this is one case where two wrongs do make a right? A bit of paper towel isn't the only way cops get creative. Often tricking people into thinking cops are around is just as good as actually having one around. The Ada Police Department found a new use for one of their first aid dummies, decking it out in police blues and putting it in a patrol cop car. It might not be too convincing up close, but if you're sailing by at 80 miles per hour, it sure is. But if the cops don't have any spare cars lying around, they can always go to the Looney Tunes School of Deception and just paint their own cutouts. This picture taken in Turkey is just one example of a national strategy to stop speeding. It's pretty clever, even if it's unlikely locals are gonna fall for the same trick twice. Ever seen Minority Report? You know, the one where cops predict crimes before they happen? Cool, but that's impossible, right? Well, turns out modern police have their own version of it. It's called predictive policing, where authorities feed tons of data on crime hotspots and criminal records into an algorithm. From this, the algorithm tries to figure out who will commit a crime, where it'll go down, and even who the victim will be. The idea is to make policing more efficient and help officers manage their time better. Pretty cool, right? Well, turns out it's a lot scarier than it sounds. Amnesty International looked at predictive policing in the UK and found that these systems were profiling minority groups with shady data and tracking people who hadn't even committed crimes. Amnesty International accused the disparities of being so harsh that they said it was supercharging racism. Not good. On top of all this advanced system doesn't even seem to be preventing crime. How does something that sounds so cool turn out to be so terrible? At the end of the day, the best way to avoid getting into problems with law enforcement is simply to not commit any crimes. Then you should be fine, right? Well, maybe not entirely. You might have heard rumors about the end of the month being the most dangerous time to drive because cops have ticket quotas they need to fill and are looking for any sort of excuse they can get to hand some out before the deadline. Officially, ticket quotas are illegal and do not exist. Unofficially, there are numerous confessions from officers that there is pressure within departments to reach a certain level of performance. It's a way to give the public and the people in charge a tangible statistic about just how clean they're keeping the streets. And let's face it, tickets are money, and whenever there's money involved, you can bet there's a load of people being mischievous. But finally, we've reached the end of the video. Which of these surprised you the most? Thanks for watching.